10 years ago, Christian was forced to propose to his girlfriend. Jessica frightenedly shook the test in front of him, which showed 2 clear pink stripes. He was left with no choice. His father had always taught him to take responsibility and go all the way. A lot had changed in that time. Christian dropped out of school and pursued an entirely different profession. And his wife Jessica trained as a hairdresser stylist and was even able to open her own small salon. The couple had another daughter, and it seemed as if nothing could stand in the way of their happiness. Jessica and Christian were the closest people in each other's lives. The only thing that differed them was their temperaments in bed. They were so different that Jessica was literally going crazy. Alone with herself, she fantasized about other men. Then it was the trainer at her gym. Then the man she'd seen on escalator across the street when she went down the subway in the morning. She imagined so vividly where and more importantly, what could happen between them that sometimes these thoughts took her so far into the dream world that it was an impossible task to return to the real world. The woman realized that she was almost obsessed with the thought of cheating. Real adultery was not part of Jessica's plans, but these fantasies were taking up too much of her time. She was angry at herself, angry at her husband. Every time he refused her intimacy, she wanted to grab Christian by the shoulders and shake him harder. She wanted to scream in his face that she couldn't go on, but her conscience wouldn't let her do it. Her husband tried his best, but he could not keep up with Jessica's desires. The woman often thought back to the time when they had first met. They had nothing in common except their desire to be near each other and their infinite intimacy. No children, no responsibilities, and no household. They were so young, so carefree that even now it seemed like a dream. Neither of them remembered what it was like to have as much freedom as you wanted. Each spouse now had so many responsibilities that they didn't always have time to do them all. Their favorite thing to do now was to take their evening smoke breaks together. They would put the children to bed, turn off the lights in the whole apartment, and meet on the balcony afterward. The spouses would sit on the floor on 2 sack chairs and look out through the city's smog-ridden panoramic windows into the distance. The only thread of supposed freedom that bound them together, their sinking into the cushioned armchairs, they were close to each other again, just as they had been 10 years ago. Christian was telling Jessica something, and she was listening silently and attentively. When they both crossed the threshold that separated the balcony and their bedroom, they would be different people again, man and woman swept up in the maelstrom of adulthood. The couple treasured those brief moments, trying to prolong them by smoking one after the other. "What do you think would have happened if we divorced back then?" Jessica asked one day, letting out rings of smoke from her mouth. "I probably wouldn't have left the institute, and now I'd be working in a profession, a job I didn't like, and you'd have gone to the big city." Her husband smiled back at her, just as she had dreamed. The question that had been tormenting her wife lately was on her tongue. She hesitated to say it. Jessica knew that Christian would not like to hear her say it, but suddenly he himself, as if he could read her mind, said, "I have no regrets, you know, our family has given me more than I could have achieved on my own." Jessica was silent. She herself would never have been able to give an honest answer to such a question, and she prayed that Christian would not think of asking her. But her husband remained silent. Jessica met Dale at the cafe. It was lunchtime, and all the tables were taken. The man approached her and asked permission to sit next to her. Without even looking at him, Jessica nodded. She was engrossed in reading a new book, and she didn't want to be distracted by such little things. She could feel her neighbor's gaze drilling down on her. It distracted her reading and made her wildly irritated. She abruptly slammed the book shut and looked the stranger straight in the eye. The man was smiling contentedly. Only now she could see his unusual features and beautiful gray eyes. "Well, why did you stop?" he said, sipping his coffee. "I liked it so much to watch you. You have so much emotion on your face." "I don't like it when people stare at me," Jessica answered angrily. She was about to leave, but the stranger held out his hand to her. "Please stay. I didn't mean to offend you." His smile was so disarming and inviting that Jessica's mind immediately flashed to images of undressing this man, of touching him with her hands. She shook her head to get away from her thoughts, which were completely out of place. The man introduced himself and asked about the book Jessica was reading. They got to talking. When it was time to leave, Dale asked for her number. After a moment's hesitation, she dictated the numbers and spent the rest of the day thinking only of him, of her new acquaintance. Their communication quickly turned from deliberately polite to more relaxed. Dale was increasingly picking Jessica up at lunchtime and taking her somewhere. To a hotel he'd rented for just an hour, to an apartment he called his own, or just away from the city. The woman stopped taking clients around lunchtime. She knew that she and her lover probably wouldn't make it back in time, and an unpleasant story could happen and the client would be left unhappy. Jessica valued her reputation as a master more than anything else, and she didn't want a little thing like being late to ruin it. She did not hide her family from Dale from the beginning. The woman honestly told him that she had 2 daughters and a husband, and that she was on good terms with her husband. She made a decision not to lie to her lover, although she did not tell her spouse a word of truth. She carefully concealed her affair, frankly afraid of her husband's reaction. She failed to hide something else from Christian. He suddenly noticed that his wife had completely stopped demanding intimacy from him. When he asked her why this change had suddenly occurred, she didn't immediately know what to say and told Christian who knows what. Later she bemoaned herself for such an oversight. After all, the change was noticeable from the love of an exuberant wife who tirelessly demanded the fulfillment of her husband's marital duties. She became aloof and as if cold. She had to lie that her doctor had prescribed her pills and that their side effect was diminished desire. She even pulled a bright yellow packet of vitamins out of her bag and shook them in front of her husband's eyes, hoping that he would believe her words. Christian smiled, nodding in agreement. Jessica exhaled a sigh of relief. Her secret affair was no longer a secret one day. Her spouse came to her salon to pick up her youngest daughter's phone, which she had forgotten in the car about her mother. The smiling receptionist girl told Christian that his wife had left for lunch and promised to be back by 1 o'clock. It was already 1:30 on the clock and the man decided to wait for his spouse. As Jessica and Dale drove his car up to the parlor, Christian was just fuming standing near the porch. When he saw the woman he loved kissing a man he didn't know, Christian's eyes darkened with anger. He did not expect such a reaction from himself, but suddenly he walked up to the car and sharply opened the door. He grabbed the dazed Dale by the jacket and began to pull him out of the driver's seat. When he finally succeeded, he punched him in the eye with his fist with all his might. His wife's lover grabbed the bruise and roared in pain. Jessica ran up to them, wanting to pull Christian away, but he made no more attempts to hit Dale and simply watched silently as a bruise poured over his opponent's face. The woman, making sure her lover was all right, walked over to her husband. There was no more distance between them than an arm's length away, and it seemed to both of them to be a whole chasm. Christian, trying not to look Jessica in the eyes, said, "My daughter forgot her phone. It's in your car. Open it and I'll go get it. She's waiting at school." My wife nodded and looked in her purse for the keys and clicked the alarm. After getting what she wanted, the man drove away in silence. He was waiting for her in the evening at their usual spot. The couple almost simultaneously flicked a lighter and took a drag. The silence lasted forever. Finally, Jessica found the courage to tell her husband about her infidelity. She tried to speak in a way that didn't incriminate Christian, but it was getting out of hand. Today, it was the other way around. Jessica talked and her husband listened in silence. When the story was over, he extinguished the last cigarette and stood up. The man didn't give his wife a hand as he usually did. He simply walked out, closing the door behind him to more than just the balcony. The children took the divorce the hardest. The daughters could not believe that their beloved father would no longer live with them. The older girl, who understood a little more, resented her mother. She heard her father's words about cheating when he was on the phone with a lawyer and understood everything. 6 months after her lover's divorce, Dale moved in with her. They lived together for 3 years, and when Jessica announced to her common-law husband that she was pregnant, she didn't find a single thing of his in her apartment 24 hours later. The man had simply vanished without even leaving a note. She was left alone, trying to run a business at the same time. Being a mother of 2 teenagers and waiting for another child, in the evenings, as she sat in her chair on the balcony, she wanted to howl with exhaustion and despair. The chair beside her was empty and the finished pack of her ex-husband's cigarettes lay orphaned in a drawer of her desk. Such is the story. The next story is no less interesting. It tells the story of how a married boss fell for the flirtation of an employee, which she regretted very much. Verona and Leo had been married for 20 years. Their marriage was very early because it turned out that Verona was expecting a baby. They were only 17 when they got married, and 6 months later, they had a daughter who has now long since gone to live in another city. Verona had an expressive appearance, a tall beautiful blonde that anyone would notice. She didn't look her age and often collected compliments about her. This year was the couple's anniversary of their life together, and Leo invited his wife to a restaurant. When he got there and saw Verona, he was once again amazed at how beautiful his wife was. She was dressed in a bright red chafely dress and certainly drew attention to herself. "You look great," said her husband. He handed her a bouquet of flowers. "Thank you, darling," Verona answered. "I am glad you like it." They spent a pleasant evening together, laughing, remembering interesting moments from their lives. They even called their daughter by video link, and she congratulated them on their anniversary. "I have news. I'm being transferred to another department," Verona said, pushing her plate away from her after dinner. "Why?" My husband was surprised. "They need a supervisor there. It's a new department and it needs someone who can train and guide the new employees." Leo was very proud of his wife. He offered to drink to this great news. "Then my next toast is to you, my beautiful wife," he smiled. Leo offered to walk Verona home. Just like in the good old days when they were still children, they avoided each other in the evenings. Verona gladly agreed. Marriage often lacks moments like that. They walked home through the park and the fresh spring breeze blowing in their faces, bringing the sense of blooming plants. Verona was very sad that moments like this were few and far between. 20 years of marriage had taken its toll on family life and dictated its own rules. The next day, Verona went to work. The woman loved it very much, though she could well afford not to go there, because Leo was making good money and could support the family. Today Verona was scheduled to have an interview with a new employee. When she walked into the office, a young man was already waiting for her. She smiled at him and asked him to wait a little longer. After 10 minutes, she called him over and asked him to sit across from her. Of course, Verona couldn't help but appreciate the man's appearance. He was young, handsome, and his whole appearance indicated that he knew what he wanted from life. "Good day, my name is Verona." The woman smiled. "Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Max." The man smiled back and Verona felt the heat inside her. It was the smile of a confident man and it was very winning. They chatted. Verona even offered him coffee to stay in his company a little longer. She enjoyed talking to Max and wanted to learn as much as she could about him, even though she made the decision to hire him almost immediately. "Thank you for the interview. I would be very happy to have such an employee in our company. I hope you will be able to start work soon." "You scared me." Laughing nervously, Verona said. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." The man made coffee for himself and Verona and placed the cup with the flavored beverage next to the laptop. He sat across from her and watched her as she typed. "Please, in spite of me, you're distracting me," Verona asked. "I thought you liked my attention." Verona was embarrassed. Had she slipped up somewhere and Max noticed that she was attracted to him? "Well, don't be embarrassed. Do you think I don't notice the way you look at me and how you literally undress me with your eyes?" he added. Max got up from the desk, walked around the desk and leaned over to in a warm breath, touched her skin, she recoiled. "I have a husband." Not too confidently, she said. "Her husband is not a wall to move." Max replied in a whisper and his lips touched her neck. It all happened so quickly that Verona didn't even have time to recover. Afterwards, she fed herself for her weakness, but at the same time she was happy. Max often began stopping by her office. He liked the feeling that they were not alone. But unfortunately or fortunately, apart from these meetings, nothing else connected them. Even though Verona tried to develop their relationship, one morning she woke up with the firm intention of telling her husband everything. She decided that Leo did not deserve this deception. It was a day off and Leo woke up later than his wife. So when he arrived in the kitchen, Verona was already drinking coffee. He thought his wife was acting strangely very nervous and her hands were even shaking a little. "Do you have a headache?" Carefully, her husband asked. No, I do not have a headache. But I have something to talk to you about. And Verona told him all about Max, about her feelings for him and what was going on with him at work. She had never felt so weak and defenseless as at this moment. She kept expecting Leo to start screaming, swearing, and maybe even throw something at her. But he took it calmly. I guessed. Smiling sadly, Leo said, your behavior has changed. It's like you're 17 again. And I haven't seen you like that for a long time. That's why I sometimes thought you were seeing someone else. Why didn't you say anything? Verona asked. She was shocked by what her husband had told her. I didn't want to lose everything. If you admit it, I would have to leave. I could not live with you, knowing this information. It's one thing to guess, but it's another thing to know for sure. The two of them sat in the kitchen and were silent. They each drank coffee and thought about something else. Verona had many more words in her head that she had been preparing to say to her husband, but didn't have to. She felt like a traitor who had ruined someone else's life. Perhaps she would have felt better if her husband had actually yelled at her. How coldly he took the information to heart made her soul feel even worse. What shall we say, daughters? Verona asked in a whisper. Let's tell her the truth. She is a big girl and I think she will understand. We are all adults and understand that bad things in life happen from the indifference and coldness of her husband. Verona wanted to howl. She understood that he had chosen the right tactic. He wanted to give her some of the pain she had brought him. They divorced, dividing all the property they had accumulated. Leo fulfilled his dream and bought himself a house by moving out of town. It was something he had wanted very much. But Verona was a city dweller and out of solidarity with his wife, he did not buy a house. But now that he was free, he could afford everything. Despite the fact that Verona was a woman quite independent, it was very difficult to build her life anew. She could have been fired for having an affair in the workplace, but she still risked telling Max about her divorce and didn't get the reaction she had hoped for. She told him that now they cannot hide. If necessary, she will arrange it in another firm and then their relationship will not be threatened. He laughed and said he didn't want a relationship. He liked everything as it was because that was all he wanted. Verona was hurt after his words and she realized that by betraying herself she had also been betrayed. After this news she cried all day in her office and later, not being able to stand being with Max every day side by side, she submitted her resignation and ended up losing both her husband and her good job because of her weakness. Of course she found another job without much trouble, but she could no longer regain her former peace of mind. The woman constantly thought about how horribly she had treated her husband for the sake of momentary pleasure, and the guilt did not give her peace. Her daughter was also angry with her after what had happened. Verona was so trapped by these thoughts that her constant state of nervousness left little of her former beauty. She started to binge on stress and then the booze got involved. From once an attractive woman who had everything, she turned into a completely ordinary, abandoned by all, the cheater. So that's the story. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and I've been happily married to my awesome wife, Ella, who's 25 for about 3 years now. We're the kind of couple who knows each other so well that we finish each other's sentences and laugh at each other's silly jokes. Life has been pretty great, or at least that's what I believed. Recently though, I couldn't help but notice that Ella has been acting a bit strange. She started staying late at work more often and became all secretive about her phone. It might sound weird, but call it a gut feeling or just intuition, I had this hunch that something might not be quite right. After weeks of trying to push away those troubling thoughts, I finally decided to confront the situation head-on. It was nerve-wracking, but I knew I needed to find the truth, even if it meant facing some painful realities. Late one night, while she was asleep, I planned to check her phone and go through her messages and apps. I had never done something like this before, but I hoped it would give me some clarity, and deep down, I prayed that my gut instincts were wrong. As I was swiping through her photo gallery, my heart sank when I saw a picture of her with an unfamiliar man kissing her cheek. I couldn't help but think, what on earth is going on? Why would she do this if she was happy with me? My curiosity led me to read her messages, and that's when I discovered a chat with a guy named Jacob. They had been meeting up at hotels, and their conversation was filled with very explicit and intimate details. It was a painful and shocking revelation that left me feeling betrayed and hurt. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, but now I needed to figure out how to confront her and talk about what I had discovered. I was feeling a whirlwind of emotions, furious and heartbroken at the same time. The person I loved the most had betrayed me by cheating with another man. Trying to process it all, I decided to sleep on it and confront Ella in the morning. When morning came, she looked really stressed and anxious. She must have noticed that her phone was moved from her usual spot on the bedside table. Annoyed, she asked me if I had gone through her phone. With a calm expression, I told her to stop pretending, because I already knew she had been cheating on me. To my complete surprise, Ella broke down and admitted that she had cheated, because she felt bored with her life and Jacob, the other man, was also married. She went on to reveal that they were in love, and that Jacob's wife had no idea about their affair. As she divulged more and more details, my heart sank, and it felt like my world was collapsing around me. It was after that moment that I felt a sense of responsibility not only to myself, but also to Jacob's unsuspecting wife, Mandy. She deserved to know the truth about what was happening. So, I made up my mind to talk to Mandy about everything. I knew it wouldn't be an easy conversation, but I couldn't let her continue living in the dark. To reach out to her, I reached out to her on social media after finding out Jacob's social media when I was going through the messages. I asked her if we could meet privately to talk, and she was hesitant at first, and then I told her that I have something to tell her about her husband. Then she agreed, and we decided to meet at a quiet cafe. As I started to share the truth with Mandy, her face went through a roller coaster of emotions, from shock to disbelief, and finally, heartbreak. It was clear that this revelation was painful for her to take in. Despite the heartache, Mandy appreciated me telling her the truth. She deserved to know what was happening behind her back, and I hoped she would gather the strength to confront her cheating husband and find a better path for herself. Seeking revenge can be a risky game, but I wanted Jacob to understand the pain he caused both me and Mandy, so I decided to give him a taste of his own medicine. I created a fake social media account and began flirting with Jacob, knowing he wouldn't be able to resist. I portrayed myself as a single woman looking for excitement and adventure. Sure enough, Jacob fell right into the trap, and we started chatting regularly. I couldn't help but think about how Ella would react when she discovers that her supposed true love is also cheating on her. I played my part to perfection, leading Jacob on and making him believe that there was a real chance for something more between us. I could tell he was excited and eager to meet in person. That's when I decided to drop the bombshell. I revealed my true identity and confronted him about the affair with Ella. To make things even more intense, I asked Mandy to be there with me, and I also ensured that Ella would be present too. When we all got there, the expressions on Ella's and Jacob's faces were absolutely priceless. Mandy didn't hold back and told Jacob that she was divorcing him and done with their relationship. At the same time, I didn't spare Ella the truth either. I let her know that her so-called lover Jacob had come to meet me, thinking I was a woman to hook up with. To add to the drama, I handed over the divorce papers to her. The shock and guilt in Jacob's voice were evident as he tried to explain himself, but I wasn't interested in his excuses. I wanted him to feel the same pain he caused others. After that confrontation, I cut all contact and walked away, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Ella looked equally confused, and she started to cry, begging me to stay and that she still loved me. I didn't believe anything she said. I told her that I will give her a week to pack up and leave from my house, and I walked away. It felt amazing to get back at her, and moreover, it felt amazing to pick myself up for once. I deserve better, and I know it. In the weeks that followed, the pain slowly began to subside, and I focused on rebuilding my life. With the support of friends and family, I rediscovered the person I was before the betrayal, and I started to heal. During this time, I also took the necessary steps to finalize my divorce from Ella. It was a challenging process emotionally, but I knew it was the right decision for my own well-being and happiness. As for Mandy, she and I developed a strong bond of friendship. Going through similar experiences had connected us in a unique way, and we both found solace in each other's company. Mandy decided to move on from the painful chapter of her life and focus on her own growth and happiness. In the months that followed, I immersed myself in new hobbies, career opportunities, and social activities. I surrounded myself with positive influences and took the time to rediscover what truly made me happy. Through self-reflection and personal growth, I came to realize that my worth wasn't defined by anyone else's actions or choices. I learned to love and value myself, and that newfound self-respect allowed me to attract healthier relationships into my life. Eventually, I met someone new. A kind, understanding, and loyal person who appreciated me for who I was and treated me with the love and respect I deserved. We took things slowly, allowing trust and affection to blossom naturally. This relationship taught me that there is hope for love after heartbreak, and that the right person can come into your life when you least expect it. As for Ella and Jacob, I heard through the grapevine that their relationship was short-lived after the confrontation. The trust they once had in each other was irrevocably shattered, and they went their separate ways. In the end, I chose not to dwell on revenge or bitterness. Instead, I focused on my own growth and happiness. The experience taught me valuable lessons about trust, forgiveness, and the importance of prioritizing self-love. OP, I want to say that I'm truly sorry you had to go through such a painful experience. Discovering infidelity in a relationship can be devastating, and it takes a lot of courage to confront the situation head-on like you did. It's understandable that you wanted Jacob to understand the consequences of his actions and to feel the pain he caused others. Your decision to expose the truth to Jacob's wife, Mandy, was incredibly brave and considerate. By doing so, you not only stood up for yourself, but also saved her from continuing a relationship with a cheater. Ending things with Ella may have been tough, but it's evident that you realized your self-worth, and that you deserve better than being treated that way. Putting yourself first and choosing to walk away from a toxic situation was the right thing to do. You should never settle for anything less than a loving and faithful partner who respects you. It's important to remember that healing from this experience will take time, but know that you made the right choices for your own well-being. As you move forward, may you find the happiness and love you truly deserve, surrounded by people who genuinely appreciate and care for you. You've shown strength and integrity throughout this ordeal, and I truly sympathize with what you've been through. Keep your head high and remember that better things await you on the horizon. With this new person you've met, continue to take things slowly and make sure to look out for any red flags. Thank you for sharing with us. Now let's get into our second story for today. So, my wife and I have been married for 11 years, and we have 2 daughters aged 10 and 11. The other day, I was online taking care of some minor medical stuff when I noticed some appointments on the list that I wasn't aware of, appointments for my wife. I saw one for her being 6 weeks pregnant and another for her having an abortion. I was completely taken aback by this discovery. Later that night, I decided to ask her about it. I wanted to know if she had any plans to tell me about the pregnancy. Our conversation became a bit intense, with her asking me questions and me trying to understand why she hadn't shared this with me earlier. I mentioned the abortion as well, and we went back and forth discussing how I found out and what led to this situation. Honestly, at that moment, I wasn't even considering the possibility of someone else being involved. You see, I had a vasectomy a few years back, and I had a follow-up appointment to confirm that the procedure was successful. Of course, I'm aware that vasectomies can sometimes reverse themselves, but it didn't immediately cross my mind. As the story continues, I'm doing my best to be supportive, even though I'm not particularly upset about anything except for the fact that she kept this from me. Then, she drops a bombshell. She confesses that she was afraid to tell me about the pregnancy, because she wasn't sure if I was the father. It turns out she's been having unprotected sex with a coworker in the back of her car. She works nights for the past 6 months. I was completely blindsided by this affair. According to her, she regrets the decision to have an abortion, which happened back in early November. Shockingly, she admits that she continued to have sex with him, even a couple of times in February. Right now, she's an emotional mess, and although I really want to comfort her, I'm trying to stay strong. It's hard to come to terms with what she's done. She's the one who made these choices, and now she has to face the consequences. I want to make it clear that I don't blame myself for what happened. It was her decision, her actions, and her mistakes. Even though this all unfolded just earlier this week, I'm feeling incredibly torn up inside. I still love this woman deeply, but I can't overlook or forgive what she did. Our 11 years of building a relationship and trust seem to have crumbled in a single day. My priority now is her well-being, but I've come to the realization that I can't be the one to provide that for her anymore. I've already expressed my desire for a separation, and I've asked her to move out. I live in a home that I rent from my mother, and part of the agreement is that I also help take care of my grandmother, who lives with us. It would be incredibly awkward for her to stay here once the rest of the family knows about the situation. However, even if my grandmother didn't live with us, I would still ask her to move out. My mindset is that I didn't cheat, so why should I be the one to uproot my life? It's a difficult and emotional situation, but I know I need to prioritize my own well-being and make decisions that are right for me moving forward. I've reached out to a lawyer, and I'm in the process of gathering information for the separation papers. I've also taken the responsible step of getting tested for STDs, and fortunately, the results so far have been clean. I haven't told my children about the situation yet. My soon-to-be ex wanted to downplay it as just a breakup, but I firmly believe they need to understand the seriousness of a marriage, so I plan to be honest with them about the fact that their mother had a boyfriend. She started crying and told me to not tell anyone about the reason for the breakup, and especially not the kids. Her words were falling to deaf ears. I was the one who was supposed to be crying and asking her why she did what she did, but here I am making calls to my immediate family telling them that me and my wife are splitting up and the reason is because she cheated on me, and she is pregnant with another man's child. I still haven't met this man, and I have no intentions to meet him either. He can take my ex and leave my daughters to me. My mother-in-law called me and apologized on behalf of my ex and told her that she is stupid for doing this to such a good man. I didn't know what to say either. I loved her family dearly and they picked my side too. They said that they completely cut off ties with her, and that she deserves to suffer the consequences. I later kicked her out of the house and said I will be taking full custody of the kids and now she can go live with that coworker of hers. She didn't utter a word after that. This whole experience has been incredibly tough on me. I feel like I'm barely holding myself together, especially today. I'm trying to maintain a strong front in front of my daughters, but there are moments when I have to step away to collect myself. It's been a few weeks since I last heard from my ex and things have been going pretty well for me. The custody case for my two girls seems to be in my favor and they are coping with everything remarkably well. I'm relieved that I can finally find happiness in the company of just my girls and myself. OP, I want to extend my deepest sympathies to you for the heartbreak and pain you're going through. It takes immense courage to confront such a difficult situation head-on and prioritize the well-being of your two daughters. Please know that what you did was absolutely the right thing. It's clear that you care deeply for your girls and want to teach them the importance of honesty and commitment in a marriage. While the road ahead may be tough, I believe you and your daughters will be better off without your ex-wife's actions and betrayal in your lives. With time, wounds will heal and you'll find happiness again. Stay strong and remember that you have made a decision that reflects your strength and love for your family. Your resilience will undoubtedly lead to brighter days ahead. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. I, 32, male, was married to my ex-wife, 28, female, for 2 years. It still shocks me that after all the promises my ex-wife made to me, she stooped so low and cheated on me. My wife and I first met at my cousin's college graduation ceremony. She had also come to attend her brother's graduation, and we got along well. After the ceremony, she gave me her number at request, but it took me weeks for her to finally take my calls. After weeks of her not taking my calls, I coincidentally bumped into her one day, and she apologized for not taking my calls, and offered that we should go to the movies together. Going to the movies was our first date, and from there, multiple dates followed, and we ended up marrying after a year of dating. In the beginning, marrying my wife brought me so much happiness. She ticked all my boxes, and everything was smooth between us. She was great in bed, a good cook, and she took good care of me. We were always so happy together, and I loved what we shared. While my wife worked as a data entry clerk, I worked as a heavy machine technician, and what we earned was enough to take care of us. Aside from being happy that I married my wife, I was also glad she had a great family. I grew up with my dad, and he raised me as a single parent, and the only cousin I had was my dad's younger sister's daughter. One of the things I always looked forward to was a family of love, and that's what my wife had. She had 2 brothers and 1 sister, plus her parents. Her family were so close to each other, and since we all lived in the same town, we used to hang out once every month as a family unit. Whenever we had a picnic, family dinner, or a gathering, all of my wife's siblings would come with their spouses, and this was how I got close to one of her brother-in-laws, my wife's sister's husband. We were around the same age, which allowed us to bond well. Most times, if my wife and her sister were hanging out or going out of town for the wedding of a mutual friend or an extended family member, her brother-in-law, and I would go out for a couple of drinks or watch football together. As time passed, he wasn't just my favorite brother-in-law, we became very good friends. Months after my wife and I clocked a year together, I noticed she was getting closer to her sister's husband. It's not like there was anything wrong with being close to her sister's husband, but I felt something was different with their relationship, and some other changes followed. For example, if we went for a family dinner, my wife would talk to everybody except her brother-in-law, which was very unlike her. And if her brother-in-law and I were hanging out, and I mentioned my wife in our conversation, he would avoid the topic and chip in something else. Regarding their closeness, if we all went somewhere, maybe the park or shopping mall, my wife would prefer to hang with her sister and husband than with me. If we sat at a table to eat together, she would prefer to sit next to him and leave me alone wherever I was. I quietly watched her for months to ensure my head was not messing with me. Around the same time, I noticed all these changes. My wife's attitude towards me changed, too. It got so bad that we could not converse without her mentioning her brother-in-law's name. Our intimacy dropped, too, and she barely allowed me to touch her. Whenever I tried to, she'd complain about being tired or not being in the mood. Sometimes, she'd even say she was seeing her monthly flow even when I knew she wasn't. Before I suspected something was going on between her and her brother-in-law, my wife did not care about her looks whenever we wanted to hang out as a family unit, but she suddenly became so concerned. She'd wash and curl her hair in advance, pick out a dress that would expose her thighs and cleavages, and apply makeup. It became evident that she was trying to look good for a reason, and even her sister and other family members noticed the great difference. The whole time, I had been suspecting my wife. Deep down, I wanted to be wrong. But one night, after waiting for almost an hour for her to stop chatting and blushing on her phone and spend time with me, she said she was tired as usual and slept off. I was so hurt by her actions and neglect that I went through her phone to see who had been making her blush like that. When I accessed her phone and went through her social media accounts, I stumbled on her messages on WhatsApp with her sister's husband. She saved his name as Bestie with 3 love emojis, and I suspected he was the one before I opened their conversation. I could not believe what I saw when I went through their conversation. Not only was my wife having an affair with her BIL, as I suspected, but they had also exchanged nudes. Even that evening, he had sent her pictures of his private part, and wrote a long erotic text of all the nasty things he would do to her when they met again. They planned to meet in a cheap motel in 2 days, and they kept recounting their last escapade together. I was so disappointed and didn't know how to feel. To even think that they were making jokes about her getting pregnant for him and keeping the child. I felt so betrayed. At that moment, I felt like stuffing her with a pillow. I had to control my anger because she wasn't worth getting a life sentence for. Shortly after I was done with my emotional meltdown, I had an idea to teach her a lesson. So I took screenshots of their conversation, especially the parts where he sent her his nudes, and they mentioned meeting at the motel to have fun. Then I cleared all traces that I went through her chats. That night I couldn't sleep at home because I was hurt and kept crying like a baby. Even though I suspected something was fishy, I still could not believe my wife would break me like that after all our promises to each other. The following day, I went to work from the motel I spent the night at, and she kept calling me the whole morning to find out why I wasn't at home when she woke up. I cooked up a lie for her, and I told her I'd be home after work. When I got home that evening, she could tell something was wrong, but I told her I had a bad day at work. Meanwhile, the following day, she had planned to meet with my BIL at the motel. She didn't know I had called her sister and explained everything. She was more shocked than I was and promised she would not confront her husband. Also, I created a WhatsApp group chat, added all her close family members to it, and told them everything I found out. I dropped the screenshots I took there so everyone could see, and they couldn't believe it. Her sister kept doubting that my wife would do such a thing to her. After everyone was out of their shock phase, we all planned to go to the location of the motel they would be using so we could catch them in the act. On D-Day, which was a Saturday, I watched as my wife dressed her best, did her makeup, and lied to me about going to see one of her old-time friends who had just given birth. I acted all calm and watched her as she left. About 10 minutes after she left, I drove to the location and notified her family that she was on the move. Eventually, we all rendered vows at the motel as planned and decided to go to her room. There were 5 of us, excluding her father. When we got to her room, I knocked and pretended to be room service, and she opened the door with a white towel wrapped around her chest. The moment she saw that I was the one, she froze. Then we all entered the room one after the other. Her BIL was in the bathroom, and when he heard voices and came out to see us, he ran back into the bathroom and refused to come out. My sister-in-law was so heartbroken, and she attacked my wife. Right there, I told her to her face to not bother coming home and that she'd be hearing from my lawyer soon. Her mom and brothers could not even say anything to her. They all stood there in awe. I left the room and left them there so she could deal with her family. Immediately I got home, I threw her stuff out of my house and contacted a divorce lawyer to start processing our divorce papers. She tried to call me and beg a couple of times, and I told her she was insane to think I'd take back a shameless cheat like her. The worst was that she had no one to turn to, her family disowned her, and her sister cut all ties with her because she couldn't handle the betrayal. I had to divorce her and officially get rid of her. Her sister also divorced her husband, and my wife had to move in with her friend before she left town. Later, I found out that their affair started under my roof, and they had it going long before I suspected something was happening. My wife claimed she continued the affair with her BIL because he was not as boring as me. I guess she will have enough fun living with disappointed family members for the rest of her life. I'm fine now, but I decided to not marry again. It's better to be alone so I don't experience such disappointment and heartbreak again. OP, you did a great thing by divorcing your ex-wife, and her sister did the right thing. Indeed, she is a shameless cheat, and had no shame in cheating with her sister's husband. Ignore what she said, OP. You being boring had nothing to do with this. She only used that as an excuse. It's a stupid excuse, by the way. You should be glad you found out earlier. If not, you would have raised her BIL's child. Concerning marrying again, it's all up to you. You don't have to if you don't want to. Most women have no shame. Sadly, it's becoming a norm. Anyways, I'm happy to hear you're doing better. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now let's move on to the next story of the day. My name is Lucas. My ex-wife, Arya, and I were married for 3 years before we went our separate ways. Arya and I lived in the same town, but I did not know her until I was 25. Even with that, we didn't start dating until 4 years ago. We dated for a year, and we married for 3 years. I know this might sound simple-like, but meeting Arya was love at first sight. I liked her the instant I met her, and I had this conviction that she would be the woman I would spend the rest of my life with. She was intelligent, hardworking, and pretty, and I felt we were a match made in heaven. Even though she gave me a tough time before we dated, I didn't mind waiting for her until she was mine. Fast forward to after we got married. I was literally the happiest man on earth. Although I did not express myself so much, I was glad we were finally married. Everything was blissful for the first 2 years and some months of our marriage. We enjoyed each other's company and literally did everything together. For a long time, I had been hoping to find a woman who would love me wholeheartedly, and when Arya came into my life, I was relieved. While we were married, Arya and I didn't have so many issues, and also we knew it was very normal for us to butt heads from time to time, and we understood that. We tried as much as possible to settle whatever issue we had before we got to the extent of keeping malice with each other. Arya was someone who loved to hang out and party with her friends, and I was someone who loved to stay home and watch television. I barely went out except it was extremely important. In fact, I would prefer to cancel on my friends and stay at home to rest or do something for myself. For once, I never stopped Arya from doing her thing. I supported her and allowed her to go out with her friends as much as she wanted during weekdays, and then on weekends, we would spend quality time together at home. The reason I never had issues with her always going out with her friends was because I trusted her, and I didn't expect that she would do anything to hurt me or even cheat on me. I also kept to my promise, and didn't do anything that would hurt Arya. Even before we married, I stopped talking to a couple of girls I used to, not because they were bad people, but because hanging around them always would lead me to temptation. Also, Arya had told me about her ex-boyfriend and how she was hurt and heartbroken when she found out he was cheating on her with multiple partners, and I didn't want to cause her that kind of pain again. This was why she didn't say yes to me the first few times I asked her out. She claimed she was still deeply hurt and needed to be sure she had healed properly before entering another relationship. I had also been hurt in my previous relationship, but that was a very long time ago, so I could relate to her feelings, and we assured each other that we would never cheat or do anything that would cause us pain. We agreed to not have kids yet because we wanted to spend time with ourselves and ensure that we were not holding ourselves back so our kids would enjoy the full love of their parents. Things were fine between us, and even as Arya continued to go out, I never suspected anything off. Nothing changed about her, she still acted, dressed, took care of me, and did her wifely duties. So, I was so shocked one day when I received a call from a friend of mine to come and take my wife. This friend of mine who called was a hotel manager in a very popular tourist hotel in our town. We lived in a very small town, so almost everyone, young and old, knew the hotel. When he called me to come and get my wife from the hotel, I was shocked because that wasn't where Arya told me she was going. She told me she was hanging out with her other girlfriends at one of their friends' family restaurants. I even dropped her there myself. At first I tried to explain to him that he was mistaken and might have been someone who looked like Arya, but he insisted that she was the one and that I should come over. The distance from the restaurant where I dropped Arya was almost a 45-minute drive to the hotel, meaning she left immediately after I dropped her there. Confused and curious to find out what was happening, I drove to the hotel and found Arya there. She was with an employee of the hotel, and the police were already involved. When I asked them to explain what was going on, I was informed that she was trespassing and that the employee I saw her with promised to give her a free room. They planned to spend hours together, but somehow they were caught. I was so surprised and disappointed at the same time. It felt like a dream or a prank. I wanted to say something like, "We were only pulling your legs," but when that didn't happen, it struck me that Arya had been cheating on me the whole while. In addition, the employee confessed that it wasn't the first time they did so, and it had been going on for weeks. Meanwhile, while the employee confessed, Arya was already on her knees, begging me not to listen to them that she was being framed. I knew she was lying because she wasn't kidnapped to the hotel. She went there by herself to sleep with the employee. Since the manager was my friend, he wanted to let me know before he pressed charges. I was so embarrassed and heartbroken, and I even encouraged him to press charges so he could deal with Arya as he wanted. Arya was shocked when she heard my response, and her tears intensified. She begged me to talk to my friend, but my mind was made up. When she saw that I wasn't begging my friend, she begged me to take her home. I didn't say anything to her, and I watched as she cried and begged. Her affair partner was fired on the spot, and they were both arrested. To humiliate her more, I recorded her and her affair partner as they were being arrested, and after they were taken away, I posted it online. I also posted and announced on our local town's Facebook group that she was cheating on me and having an affair at a hotel with an employee. Most people in the group knew us, and that's how the news got to everyone. By the time she was bailed by her parents, she and her affair partner were the talk of town, and they faced a lot of ridicule. It was very shameful that even her close friends deserted her. It was hilarious when she tried to come home and beg me. She said she couldn't explain what pushed her to cheat on me and that she was so sorry. She claimed she still loved me and wanted us to work out, but I told her it wasn't possible. Even after she took her things out of my house and we divorced, she kept begging and crying. She even asked her best friend to try and talk to me, but I warned her and asked her to leave my house. It's been 1 year since it happened, but it still feels like yesterday. I'm having a tough time moving on, but I know that one day this will be a long-forgotten history. As for her affair partner, I don't know what happened to him, but I do know Arya did not end up with him. OP, I must admit that your ex-wife was a pretty good liar. People don't just wake up and realize they cheated on their partners. They do it with their senses intact. They do it for a reason, and your ex-wife only tried to manipulate you by saying she didn't know what pushed her. It's a good thing you didn't fall for such cheap lies, and you need to move on. I'm sure your ex-wife has moved on, and you're already history to her, so do yourself a favor and get out of the past. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. My name is Sebastian, and my ex-wife, Anna, and I had been married for 2 years before she destroyed what we had. Anna and I were colleagues at one time, but after I got an offer from a more prominent company, I resigned, and that was when we began to date. Before that time, Anna and I were not really the colleagues that got along with each other. She was reserved and barely associated with different people, except she was talked to. But despite being introverted, I still had a crazy crush on her. I can only tell her how I felt after I resigned because my former company was against coworkers dating. Luckily, when I told Anna how I felt about her, she admitted that she had the same feelings for me, too, and in no time, we began to date. I loved Anna's commitment to hard work, her smiles, her energy, and those crystal blue eyes. We got along so well, and I enjoyed every moment I spent with her, and when I eventually asked her to marry me, she said yes. For me, money was not an issue because I earned a lot of money from the tech company I worked with, and this also played a significant role in how I cared for Anna. On my own, I would drop by clothing stores and buy her clothes, shoes, jewelry, and everything she wanted, whether expensive or not. I also did this because I loved it when my woman looked good and classy. It boosted my ego. I really loved Anna, and I wanted her to be happy at all times, but aside from that, when it came to Anna, I didn't mind if she shopped every week or every month because I considered it as investing in her. Even when we were about to buy a house, I allowed her to pick the house she liked despite not liking it that much because I believed that if she was happy, then I'd be happy, yet after everything I did for her, she went ahead and cheated on me with my blood. Everything was going fine between Anna and me, but after the incident of a flood that destroyed many houses last year, I was forced to let my cousin and his wife move in with us. They had to begin life from square one because they lost everything they had, and the least I could do was support them. So my cousin and his wife asked if they could move in with us until they got back on their feet, and after I discussed it with Anna, we decided to let them live with us. Anna was thrilled to receive them, and I was glad she would always have company at home, especially when I was not around. Also, the nature of her job allowed her to work from home, and it felt good to know that she would no longer feel lonely while she worked. Little did I know that I allowed my wife to cheat on me with my cousin. The funniest thing was his wife, and I did not notice anything fishy. Whenever we returned from work, they'd act all cool with each other and didn't leave room for suspicion. My cousin, on the other hand, betrayed my trust and repaid me by screwing my wife whenever his wife and I went to work. One weekend, Anna went grocery shopping and asked me to help her fold the clothes in the closet, and that was how I stumbled on her diary tucked under a small pile of unfolded clothes. At first, I didn't want to invade her privacy, but I was curious to know what a 28-year-old woman was writing about, and to my greatest surprise, I found out that my wife and my cousin had been sleeping with each other a month after they moved in with us. I could not believe my eyes, and was heartbroken to find out she could do that to me after everything I had done for her. A part of me wanted to throw her out, as well as my cousin, but I wanted to hurt her for doing such a thing to me. I didn't even fold the clothes anymore because I didn't want her to find out that I knew. I simply came up with an excuse that I wasn't feeling okay, and she believed me. I continued to pretend everything was fine, but as soon as I got myself together, I contacted a lawyer, and he started processing our divorce papers. I also made plans for my cousin because I wanted him to feel my pain. After a couple of weeks, I decided it was time to bust them, so I pretended to leave for work, but I hid in the tool shed of our house. When Anna and my cousin thought I left, they came outside, entered the car, and began to kiss before they drove out, and I took pictures of them and sent it to my cousin's wife. I knew she'd come back home in anger, and she did. She initially denied everything until I showed her my pictures that morning. When she realized she could no longer lie, she began to cry and blame my cousin for seducing her, but it was too late. I kicked her and my cousin out of the house, informed her about the divorce papers, and warned her to stay away from me and my house. Some months later, we divorced, and I blocked her on all social media platforms. My cousin's wife divorced him, too, and luckily for them, they didn't have a child yet. Even after the divorce, Anna tried to come to me a few times, but there was nothing I could do at that point. I hated everything about her. She wanted to tell me she was no longer with my cousin, but that was her loss, not mine. Though it's been a while, my heart still aches, and I know it will be all over soon, but I'm way happier now and my new girlfriend, and I are taking things one step at a time. OP, I can't even imagine what it felt like for you to know that your wife was secretly sleeping with your own cousin. It must have really hurt you to know that your cousin broke your trust, too, and took your act of kindness for granted. It was really inhuman of them to do that. It's great that you divorced her and moved on quickly because she did not deserve you. In no time, you'll forget about her entirely, and you'll be able to move on to better things. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now, let's move on to the second story of the day. My wife and I had been married for 25 years, but in the end, I realized she was using me. I'm sharing this here because it has been a burden in my heart, and hopefully, it will clear off after I share it. The first time Maya and I met was on Christmas Eve. I went shopping as usual to grab a few stuff for the celebration the next day, and unexpectedly, the mall I shopped at was out of stock, leaving me with the last pack of the stuff I needed. Maya was already shopping with her younger sister, Kat, and when they realized I had the last box they needed, they were very disappointed. When we were about to make payment at the counter, she kept complaining to the sales representative that her Christmas had just been ruined because of that, and she could not afford to go to the next mall, which was miles away. Finally, when she kept complaining, I was forced to pay for the stuff and hand it to her because of her sweet little sister, and I left the mall. About 3 days later, I met her again at the Christmas party my town organized, and she remembered me immediately. Then, we were both very young, and we hung out with each other the whole evening. Shortly after that, we became close friends, hung out with more, and eventually, she became my girlfriend. Maya and I were so much in love, and passed through many seasons of our lives together. We dated for 4 years, and got married after that. The craziest thing was my family disapproved of Maya. To be precise, my dad didn't like her, and he kept saying there was something about her that he could not place his fingers on, but I loved Maya, and I wasn't going to let anyone separate us from each other. So, I got married without my parents' approval, which worsened my relationship with them. Maya's parents, on the other hand, did not have any problem. They blessed our marriage, and from there, we went ahead to rent our own apartment. We started living together as a couple, and I worked hard to make life easier for us. I didn't even go to college. I chose the carpentry career, and with the money I made from it, I had to sponsor Maya to college because I could see how much she wanted to further her education. To be honest, there was nothing that Maya wanted that I didn't give to her, even after several years of being married to each other. We had 2 kids together, and I did my best to provide for my family. When Maya finished college, she got a job, and the pay was good, but I wasn't concerned about her money. I wanted her to be comfortable, so all she had to do was take care of minor bills while I took care of rent and groceries. Then we'd split the children's school fees. I made sure I gave her the dream life she wanted, and I had to make a lot of sacrifices for that to happen. Whenever I could, I'd buy her new stuff or give her money to go shopping at least once in 3 months. Of course, all our vacations and trips were solely my responsibility, but I didn't mind because she was my wife, and I believed it was my responsibility to treat her right. And in all the 25 years of being married to her, I never cheated on her because I wouldn't tolerate her if she did the same thing to me, so I tried as much as possible to stay away from anything that would lead to infidelity on my side. Despite being married for so long, my parents refused to talk to me, so I never visited them for Christmas, and our kids had only seen pictures of my parents. Because of that, I was forced to embrace Maya's family as my own. For example, when Martha's parents' house needed renovation, I paid heavily for that because I could not leave my work to renovate her parents' house. Martha didn't even contribute a dime because she believed it was my responsibility to do that as her parents' only son-in-law, and I didn't mind doing all of that, too, because they were the only family I had. Everything was going well between us. We were a big happy family until Maya started falling sick. When it didn't stop as expected, we went to the hospital, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and the doctor said she only had a few months to live. The news hit me like an explosion, and I could not imagine losing Maya after spending all those years with her. My legs were weak, so I managed to sit on one of those long seats in the lobby. While I was still trying to wrap my head around the bad news, I saw a man screaming at the same doctor who spoke to me. At first, I thought he had lost someone because of how heartbroken he looked, but when the doctor came to me to confirm if I was Mr. Wesley, Maya's husband, and introduced the man yelling to be Maya's boyfriend, I felt my head spin. Maya's boyfriend and I stood there for minutes, looking at each other in shock. When I finally calmed down, I asked him how he had met Maya, and he said he had been dating Maya for a very long time, and she led him to believe that she was single and had divorced a very long time ago. He told me about their intimacy, dates, and how they had lunch every day. He even said that he had gotten a ring and was ready to propose to her until he got the news of her sickness. From how he spoke, it was undeniable that he had fallen deeply in love with Maya. I explained to him that Maya and I had been married for 25 years with 2 kids, and I was even planning a surprise renewal of Val's wedding on her birthday. Evidently, we both had plans for Maya, but she used us and lied to us, even breaking our promise of never cheating on each other. Finally, after crying for a while, Maya's boyfriend told me he was leaving the hospital and would never return because Maya deserved what she got, and that was the last time I saw him. I felt so used, lied to, and backstabbed, and I couldn't help but agree that she deserved what she got. I even sat there for hours, trying to convince myself that I had a bad dream, but it was not a bad dream. It was 100% reality. Finally, when I could put myself together, I picked up my dignity and paid Maya the last visit. I walked to her room door and saw her tubed up and IVs inserted in both hands. I wiped my last tears there in the hallway, in front of her room door, and after I was done, I went to my car and drove off. Months later, her condition worsened, as the doctors had predicted, and it got so bad that she got into a coma and depended on life support. Finally, when it looked like she would not get better, I signed that enough was enough and let her go. After she passed away, all of her properties and the things she owned were given to me, and I consider them as my pay for all the sacrifices I made for her. I don't think I'll ever be able to forget her and how she betrayed me. OP, finding out the truth must have been very hard for you, especially after 25 years of being married to Maya. To even think that you had a messy relationship with your parents because of Maya, and in the end, it was not worth it. Maya deserved what she got. She played you and threw away what you had with each other after dating for years and being married for 25 years. I'm genuinely sorry, and I understand that healing from this and getting over it is not going to be easy, but I know that you can do it, and no matter how you write it, I understand how deeply it hurts. I believe you need a lot of self-love and time with your children. For now, you can take a break from relationships to heal properly, then you can go back whenever you're ready, and if you're not, there's no problem with that. Remember that you're a strong man, and we are all rooting for you. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. I met my wife a few years ago at a hospital where I went to visit my friend's wife, who just gave birth. Coincidentally, she came in at the same time, but because my friend's wife was asleep, we had to wait in the lobby for about 40 minutes to an hour before she woke up. People who know me well know I am very extroverted and I talk to strangers a lot. While waiting, I tried making jokes with the nurses at the reception desk, but they weren't having it, so I went back to sit with my wife. I tried my best to keep my mouth shut, but we could tell that the silence was awkward, and the moment I started talking, we both busted into a loud laugh. I didn't know she had been observing me, she knew I would try to talk to her. From there, we talked for almost an hour until a nurse came to tell us my friend's wife was awake, and we both went in to see her and her baby. As much as I would love to mention my wife's name, so the people out there can stay away from her, I'd love to keep this anonymous in case any of our friends stumbles on this story. Before we left the hospital that day, I got my wife's number and we started talking. I also followed her on Facebook, and we chatted there all the time. She was gorgeous, and I loved almost everything about her. As of the time we met, she was working at a veterinary shop, and I worked for a construction company. We used to hang out whenever we were free since we were both single and slowly grew fond of each other. One of the reasons I loved my wife was that she was always seeking new ways to improve herself. She read self-help books all the time and listened to all of those personal development podcasts and the rest. Honestly, she also helped me build the habits of reading books and trying to become better, and it made me glad to have a partner who cared about my growth. Fast forward to some months later, we got so close, and we always told each other about what during work. Even without meeting my colleagues at work, she knew their names, roles, and everything that happened during work hours. The same applied to me. I knew everyone's name in the vet clinic she worked at, including the names of the animals that came in daily and those that returned. I was sure she was the one for me at that point, and I asked her out. When she said yes, I asked her to move in with me so we could begin to plan our lives and future together, and she did. She moved in with me, and we became a super couple. I loved her so much that I did everything for her. In fact, I didn't let her contribute to paying rent because I felt it was my responsibility to take care of her. I bought her whatever she wanted, and we went on many fancy dates together. Before I met my wife, I had been in 3 different relationships, but they all cheated on me, and none of my exes cared about me like my wife did, so I believed she was the one for me. In less than 3 months of dating, I met her family, and she met mine too. Our families knew we were dating each other, and we were pretty serious too. So, after 10 months of dating and living with each other, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. Before we got married, we both agreed we would have kids after 3 years of being married, so we could spend time with each other, do the things we loved, and not have to put our lives on hold. Then most importantly, we would have saved enough money to give our children a comfortable life. A year after we got married, nothing changed, and everything was still beautiful and blissful, like when we were still dating. But things began to change between us after we celebrated our 2nd-year anniversary. My wife began to show less interest in the things she used to love, including our 2nd anniversary, which she used to look forward to, and that's when I began to suspect that something was wrong. It all started with her obsession with personal development, and she claimed she found this new mentor online. A man in his late 30s, who she asked to mentor her for a fee, and he agreed. According to my wife, this man was a life coach, and he had mentored many people in the past and helped them build their lives. At first, I didn't have an issue with her having a mentor, because I knew she wouldn't back down or change her mind until she got what she wanted, so I allowed her to do her thing. However, a couple of weeks after she started her mentorship classes with him, I noticed they were getting closer and closer, and I kept feeling that something was off between them, but I shook it off. It wasn't enough that I was paying for the mentorship hourly, but she always came up with new excuses for me to pay for things I didn't understand. She met with her mentor almost every week, and even had to cancel most of our lunch dates to be with him. Then, as if that wasn't enough, whenever I came home from work, I'd have to eat my dinner alone, watch television alone, and go to bed, because she would talk to him for hours on the phone without spending time with me. I complained about it, but she said I was making a mountain out of a molehill, so I let it slide, expecting that she would change, but it got worse. Once, we were supposed to go to my parents' house for my dad's 62nd birthday, but she didn't show up and refused to take my calls. That evening, when I returned home, I met her and her mentor having dinner in her home, and I was so mad. When she saw me, she smiled and acted like everything was fine. It even made me madder when I found out she forgot about her JaVale's birthday, even after I reminded her that morning. The craziest part was that we had not had dinner as a couple for weeks, and she even stopped cooking, but there she was eating and laughing with her mentor. I got so mad and yelled at her, then I asked her mentor to leave, but she stood up and started challenging me in front of her mentor. She said he had taught her a lot of things, and he could not leave, so I had to choose between joining them for dinner or doing something else. I was so furious that I left the house and returned to spend the night at my parents' house. That night, I stayed awake close to my phone, hoping she would call and beg me, but she didn't, and that was when I was forced to look up her mentor online. To my greatest surprise, I spent hours digging and could not find anything related to mentorship or personal development about him. When I was frustrated at finding nothing, I hired a private investigator to investigate him. Weeks after digging, the PI I hired discovered he was a convicted felon and a master manipulator with arrest warrants. I could not even believe it. The PI could not find anything related to mentorship with him, and that's when I realized that my wife had been playing me for months. She was getting money from me and giving it to her lover as his payment while I worked my ass off to give her a better life. I collected all the evidence from my PI and paid him off. The next day, I went home early so I could meet my wife at home and show her all of the evidence, but I caught them doing it on my couch and I was enraged. I hit him before I threw the evidence on the table, and my wife did not look surprised. It was an indication that she knew everything about him. She then started begging for forgiveness and asked me not to say anything. I told them I had contacted the police and she should go ahead and marry her lover and rot in jail for all I care. While I was yelling at them, the police arrived at my house and took him away. Immediately he was taken away, she went on her knees and began to beg me. She said he manipulated her, but since he was out of the picture, we could return to how we were. Hearing that made me madder, so I kicked her out and called her parents to let them know their daughter would be coming home soon and we weren't together anymore. Months later, we divorced and we went our separate ways. Until the last 6 months, she kept calling me with different numbers, until I warned her that we could never be together, even if it were in her next life. Of course, I miss her, but being single is way better than living with a cheating spouse. Even the last few months of our marriage were hell for me, so I'm glad I made the right decision. OP, I wonder why you didn't look up your wife's mentor before she started her mentorship classes. That was carelessness on your own part. It's just terrible that she played you and manipulated you to pay for classes that did not exist. Although it's hard, you made the right decision by kicking her out of your house and divorcing her. Such a woman does not deserve second chances because she would have cheated on you again, even if you forgave her. It's even more disturbing that she didn't show any remorse when you showed her the pieces of evidence, but most importantly, she is no longer in your life. Thank you for sharing with us. Now let's get into our second story for today. My wife and I fell apart after 2 years of marriage. My wife and I started dating around 2020 after the coronavirus struck the world. She had lost her family of 3 to the virus, and as her closest family friend, I had no other option than to take her in. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. One was my bedroom and the other was my office because I was already working remotely for a top freelancing platform whose name I would be withholding, and I had to move my office to my bedroom so she could sleep in the second room. When she moved in, she was grieving, always moody, and almost depressed, and I took up the responsibility of caring for her all through her stay with me. At that time, I was earning very well, so I didn't need her to contribute to anything, not even groceries. She barely ate and was not herself for the first few months. 7 months later, she snapped out of her mourning state and became active again. Then she started looking for a job. The main reason she wanted a job was to pay me back for all the things I had done for her, but when I found out, I stopped her from working and suggested that she learn a high-demand skill so she could register on the same platform I worked at and also earn remotely. She agreed and I paid for an expensive course for her and she mastered the skill. In the following months, she registered on the platform and began to get her own clients, and that was how we became 2 remote workers living together. When my wife moved in with me after she lost her parents, I had just broken up from a toxic relationship, and the last thing I wanted was a relationship. But having my wife in the house all the time helped me in some way and caused me to reevaluate the important things in life. So, in the process of her living with me, I fell in love with her even without knowing. With her becoming active again, our relationship grew stronger, and we even became closer. I literally became her only friend and family, and slowly, we started doing the things only couples did. We went on vacations together because we were both financially stable, got each other gifts, visited the places we always wanted to, and we even took more advanced courses to help us in our skills. After living together for 2 years, the neighbors and those who stayed or worked around our house knew we were together, even when I had not asked her out yet. I knew she loved me, but I was afraid she would turn me down because she kept saying she was tired of people coming into her life and leaving her when she needed them the most. So, I kept procrastinating. Eventually, I asked her out on her 27th birthday. We weren't doing anything that year, we only went to have a fancy dinner, and while we were in the restaurant, I paid the waiter to bring in a cake I had delivered some hours before we went there, and instead of having happy birthday, it had "Will you be my girlfriend?" and she said yes in excitement. Initially, I intended to propose to her, but I wanted to ask her out first. 4 months later, after she said yes to me, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. My parents already knew her because her late family and my family were friends, and they were delighted when they found out we were getting married. We made the wedding plans and had a small wedding, then moved into a bigger apartment with enough space for our respective workspace. When we moved into this new apartment, my wife was jovial and always in high spirits with the neighbors. The neighbors, too, were receptive and welcoming, unlike my former neighbors, who were always busy and barely had time to speak or talk with us for more than 5 minutes. When this happened, I was delighted because she had a different happiness spending time with the neighbors, especially since she lost her family and barely interacted with others except my family and me. She even started cooking and sharing food with the neighbors and their kids, and it contributed to their closeness. Being remote workers allowed us to create our own work timetable, and whenever she was done working, she would go grocery shopping and come back home to cook. She claimed that cooking helped her clear her head, and sharing food with other people reminded her of her family reunions and much more. I understood her point of view, so I didn't argue with her or try to stop her, even when some of the neighbors started taking advantage of her kind gesture. Aside from the food, some neighbors began to ask for financial assistance, which we helped whenever we could, and there was this 80-year-old man who asked if she could help him cook on some evenings and clean his house, too, since he had no family living with him. So when my wife told me about it, I reluctantly agreed, and she'd go over to his house twice or thrice a week to cook and clean. About a month after she started cooking and cleaning for him, I noticed she went there almost every evening except on weekends. This was more often than their initial agreement, but I thought everything was okay. Then one day, I was in my apartment watching television when I heard a knock on the door. I knew it was unlike my wife to knock when she had her keys, so I opened the door and realized it was our neighbor she cooked for. When I saw him, I thought he had come to thank me and my wife for her help, but he looked somewhat disturbed. When he sat, and I asked him if everything was okay, he first said, "Son, I want your wife to stop coming over to my house because she is having an affair with my renter." Then he stopped and looked at me. I was shocked to hear that and didn't know what to say. I asked him if he was telling the truth, and he admitted that he had no reason to lie. When we were having this discussion in my apartment, my wife had gone grocery shopping to cook the next day, so she wasn't at home. I didn't want to believe the old man, but like he said, he had no reason to lie, and it made no sense for him to lie against my wife. So in the end, I asked him if he could show me something to prove that he was telling the truth, and he promised to make a video and send it to me when next she came over, which would be her last time visiting his house. That evening, when my wife came back, I didn't mention anything to her. I just acted like everything was fine, and I didn't say that the old man came over when she was away. The next evening, she told me she was going there as usual, and I pretended to not pay any attention and acted like I was engrossed with my work. About 15 minutes after she left, the old man sent me a video of my wife in his renter's room, and they were making out in the living room, thinking he was asleep in his room. When I saw the video, I was broken. I knew the man she was kissing and could not believe she had done that to me. I thanked him and told him I'd be locking her out of the house, and he promised to do the same because his renter was late on rent payment and he had enough of him. Later that evening, when my wife came home and could not access the house, she started to yell and hit the door, but I sent her the same video, and she began to beg me from outside. She asked me to open the door to discuss things, but I was done with her. She betrayed me and did not care about my feelings. On the other end, her lover was kicked out by the old man, and they were both homeless that evening. I refused to let her in that night, and after a few days, she returned to meet her stuff packed at one corner of the house, but she refused to leave. I called the police because she was disturbing my peace and the neighbor's peace, and she was taken away. About 2 months later, I divorced her, and she cried bitterly. She tried to emotionally blackmail me into staying with her, but I had enough of her nonsense. She said something about me being the only person she had left in the world, but I reminded her she had her lover now, and I cut all ties with her. It turned out that her lover was an illegal immigrant, and he fled the country when I threatened to arrest him on the day my wife came to pick up her things. So in the end, he left her, and she had no one else to turn to. It's been a couple of months, and I still feel stupid for being played like that, but I'm way better now, and I don't think I'll be ready to be in a relationship anytime soon. OP, you ended up with bad people in the past, and they took your love for granted. You should even be glad that your wife eventually showed her true colors early in the marriage and didn't lead you on for years. It would have been more heartbreaking with time. Consider yourself lucky to have a nice neighbor who could not watch your wife cheat on you. I know you did a lot for her, but this has nothing to do with you being at fault. I'm glad you made the right decision. Wish you all the best going forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me.